You think you know what we're going to talk about.
And welcome back to Three Fates Decide.
It just sounds more dramatic that way.
All right, so this week we are going to be talking about...
But just when you least expect it, we changed the game.
One Will Smith slapped Chris Rock.
I mean, we always celebrated Easter.
Harry Potter the Half-Blood Prince.
So we're going to do another free talk, freestyle thing, no planned discussion.
At the end of the day, only one thing matters. We decide.
We're going to hit the main highlights.
That is the thing, like what we were saying back in that episode.
A quick recap.
Three Fates Decide podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Three Fates Decide. My name is Liz, and I'm here again with another solo episode. So this time, since it's almost Halloween, by the time this episode comes out, I decided to briefly revisit the topic of interesting things to check out for Halloween, since it's the spooky season time of the year. So in case you happen to be a newer listener to this show, I would like to bring to your attention the fact that actually we've done a number of episodes in the last couple of years that are related to this general theme. So all the way back with episode 22, we did a Halloween special where the girls and I actually discussed some of our personal memories of past Halloweens. And also we discussed some of the various activities and things we've watched for Halloween. And then in episode 23, we actually did a whole episode where we had a conversation about different types of phobias. So feel free to check that one out as well. Personally, I think that was actually a pretty interesting episode because we all have different types of phobias. And I'm sure there's probably at least one or two phobias we discussed in that episode that some of you may personally relate to. And just know that it's a universal thing. We are all afraid of something. You don't have to be embarrassed about it. All I can say is that you just don't want to let it take control of your life and make it difficult for you to live life in the best way possible. But at any rate, so last year for the month of October, we actually did 4 whole episodes related to either horror or true crime. So we have episode 64. We did an episode on the tragic death of the infamous Black Dahlia. Episode 65, we discussed zombies. We talked about the origin of zombies as a concept. And we also discussed various types of zombie movies. Then episode 66, we discussed the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer. Then in episode 67, we had a conversation about werewolves and vampires. That turned out to be a combined episode of the 2 different types of monsters / supernatural creatures, mainly because in more recent years, we've seen an increase in having different types of media that use the concept of werewolves versus vampires. So it just made sense to do an episode where we combine the 2 things. And episode 78, Mary and Sam had a discussion about the dramatized series about Jeffrey Dahmer, which is a follow-up to the earlier episode about Jeffrey Dahmer himself. And then earlier in 2023, Sam did solo episodes discussing the infamous Alex Murdaugh murders that tragically happened. There was a Netflix documentary about it that she discussed in episode 86, and then she did a follow-up with episode 88 about the actual trial, the court cases that happened. And then in episode 93, we had a discussion about Ted Bundy. And then in episode 102, not too long ago, we actually had a conversation about John Wayne Gacy. So feel free to listen to any of those episodes if you want to check out what we've discussed in the past that are true crime / spooky horror type topics. So for this episode, I'm going to briefly share a few things that I've seen that I would recommend you guys to check out that are either horror related or they are true crime related. I've mentioned in previous episodes that just in general, I'm not personally really into horror movies per se. mainly because modern horror movies tend to feature a lot of gore and stuff. And it's all about what is the most disgusting and gross and stuff like that. And I'm just not into that sort of thing. I do enjoy thrillers, like I enjoy suspense type of things, which is why I lean more towards true crime, mystery type stories versus like just straight up horror. I'm not super into zombies or anything, but I will say that I do recommend in general, just in case any of you have not watched them, various movies that have adapted some of Stephen King's novels. I've seen Carrie, which is actually a very good movie, the one with Sissy Spacek playing Carrie. I've also seen a couple of the remakes. They're not quite as good as the original Carrie movie with Sissy Spacek, but feel free to check those out as well. I have yet to read the book, though. I've been meaning to. And the funny thing about that is that actually, in a way, what makes Carrie a really good horror story is the fact that as a woman, as like someone who is biologically female, as someone who identifies as being female, so many things about that story is so relatable. And I'm sure for a lot of you who also are biologically female and also identify as female, there are many things about Carrie's story that would resonate with you. And it's really fascinating how some of those things that a lot of us who are female or identify as female deal with a lot of this crap in our own lives. And it got turned into a horror story, which there's a lot to unpack there, but that is not this episode. I also would recommend, if you haven't watched any of them, are some of the Alfred Hitchcock movies. If you also enjoy classic movies or you're interested in exploring classic movies when you've never really watched them before, I definitely recommend them. Not all of them are horror movies, but there are some that border into horror, and a lot of them are just straight up fascinating, fun thriller movies that anybody could enjoy. One good example is, of course, Psycho. Psycho is a very good one. It manages to be a murder mystery horror type of movie without being particularly gory. Another really good movie, it's not really a horror movie, but another good Hitchcock movie that I also enjoyed watching was North by Northwest. That's more of a mystery thriller type of movie, but that one's a good one. But any of the Hitchcock movies work. Another excellent movie and also a book that I would also recommend if you want to read like some of the more spooky mystery thriller types versus just straight up horror is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Both the book and the various adaptations that exist, I recommend. It's one of those haunting stories where you have the narrator finding herself in the middle of a strange mystery when she gets married to this man who is a widower. And when she goes to his home, because he is pretty wealthy and he has his own estate, she goes to his home, Manderley, and she finds herself in a complete mystery because there is a metaphorical ghost haunting Manderley and haunting the inhabitants, as it were, of Manderley. And you get into the mystery about like why that is and who this proverbial ghost is. If you haven't checked out that story yet, you should definitely check that one out. I would say in terms of true crime, there are, for me personally, 3 YouTube channels that I recommend. And in case you are interested in checking out these particular true crime channels, I am going to put links to those channels in the show notes for this episode. So definitely check out the show notes so you can get all the links. The first channel I would recommend is one where the channel name is called Gabulosis. And the reason why I recommend Gabulosis is because that particular channel, in terms of true crime, her specialty is she mostly focuses on crimes that happened 20 plus years ago. So anything like at least 20 years old and older, she'll discuss cases where they could have happened 20 years ago, or they could be cases that happened 150 years ago even. So basically, she's the kind of true crime YouTuber who does what she describes as like vintage true crime stories. Some of the cases are still unsolved to this day, but there are some cases she discusses where there is a resolution to what happened or partial resolution to what happened. So that's a really good one to check out. I highly recommend that one. Another really good one is Mr. Ballin. Now, chances are if you're into spooky stuff and true crime, you probably have heard of Mr. Ballin already. But in case you are one of those people who haven't heard of John Allen, definitely that's another one I would recommend. He does literally what I said, like spooky stories and true crime. Like he'll do a mix of mystery stories. He'll also talk about like weird supernatural things as well. I don't really watch too much of the supernatural stuff, but some of the true crime stories are pretty interesting that he discusses. And the third one is the one I would say is my current favorite because I've watched at least 10, 12 of her videos by now, is Rotten Mango. Now, if you haven't heard of Rotten Mango, the host of the show is a Korean American woman named Stephanie Sue. She actually has at least, I think, 3 YouTube channels in which she covers like different types of stories. But for this particular episode, I'm talking about true crime and spooky stuff. The one I would recommend is her channel, Rotten Mango. Rotten Mango is the one where she primarily talks about true crime type of stories. And what makes her channel worth checking out is that the episodes are very long. Most of the episodes are minimum 45 minutes, and some of them are over an hour. And the reason why they're that long is because when she gets into these different cases she talks about, there was a lot of research done ahead of time because she doesn't just do American stories, but she actually includes a lot of international stories, which is also another really cool thing about her channel that makes it worth checking out. But also what I appreciate about the way she tells the stories is that she really does a deep dive in some of the cases she talks about. Again, based off of the research that she and some of the hired researchers she uses were able to give to her. You really get a lot of context for the events that unfold in the case. You really learn a lot about the individuals involved in the story. You get a lot of background and context to explain maybe certain aspects of the story that may or may not be very clear to somebody who is reading, say, a random article on Google, about the case. And I would say one of the big reasons why I even discovered her channel was actually because of the very tragic case that happened earlier this year, Abby Choi, who was a model / internet celebrity / socialite from Hong Kong, and her very tragic death. And Stephanie's podcast was one of the few podcasts or YouTube channels that I was able to find that really discussed that particular case, because I had heard some bits of the story from different news media outlets, particularly Chinese-based news media. But Stephanie and the researchers she worked with for that particular story really did a very good job, deep dive, explaining who Abby was, who the perpetrators of her murder were, and potentially why they may have done that terrible crime. And from there, I wound up watching more and more of the different episodes she's done. And I would say she is a really good true crime channel that you should definitely check out if you're interested in that sort of thing. And like I said, she also covers cases that, as someone who's an American, would not necessarily have ever heard of. So that's what makes her channel really interesting and worth checking out. That's about it. If you guys have any interesting content that you would suggest and recommend to other people who happen to be interested in the spooky or true crime, feel free to share and let us know. Yeah, I hope that all of you listening have a very safe and happy Halloween.
Did you like what you heard on our episode today? Well, then feel free to come back and listen to us again. You can find us on all different streaming sites, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Deezer, iHeartRadio, Spotify, you name it, we're there. And if you really like us, feel free to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at 3 Fates Decide. That's THREE Fates Decide. You can also email us at 3fatesdecide@gmail.com and check out our website at 3fatesdecide.com to find other episodes, information about your 3 hosts, and all of our other links. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on 3 Fates Decide.